was just don't do something really crazy, or you might lose everything and not have a chance to regroup. But there are many different aspects of randomness that are just part of our daily lives. For example, I don't know if you ever studied chemistry, but the second law of thermodynamics basically says that randomness is increasing in the universe. Now, that's a paraphrase. It's much more technical than that, but namely, we're constantly encountering disorder of one kind or another. And one of the reasons for that, which I mention in my book, is that it's a lot easier to break something than it is to put it back together. So Humpty Dumpty, for example, the nursery rhyme character, fell off a wall, and that was easy. But all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. Well, that's a little lesson, because that's what life is like, and even on a very scientific way. And then there's also randomness in quantum mechanics, which just was discovered and learned about in the last.
How much of success comes down to luck, and how much is in your control? In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Michael Orkin, a statistician, author, and expert in probability, to break down the interplay between chance, risk, and persistence. Drawing from decades of experience, Dr. Orkin shares insights into how randomness shapes our lives and the strategies we can use to navigate uncertainty. We discuss lessons from high-stakes industries like crypto and gambling, and how principles like money management and resilience can apply to anyone chasing big goals. Whether you're an entrepreneur, creative, or just curious about how to stack the odds in your favor, this episode is full of practical wisdom. Welcome to Move Your Mind, where we uncover why you are holding yourself back from getting the life you want and what to do about it. With the help from high-achieving guests and experts in behavioral science, personal development, and the health and wellness space. Join us if you're ready to move out of your own way toward your ideal self. I'm your host, Nick Brax, and I've been working in the health and wellness space for the last 15 years, helping people find direction and gain the courage to take control of their life. My mission is simple: to help you learn everything that I wish I knew, so you can become your ideal self. Lacking guidance, I spent the majority of my youth feeling lost and disempowered, which led to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse. Looking back, I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate what I was experiencing. And as a man, I didn't resonate with the emotional language used in traditional therapy. I didn't need to talk about my feelings. I needed tangible solutions to guide me toward building a life I was proud of. If you can relate, then this podcast is for you. In this episode, we discuss how luck, risk, and persistence drive success. If you're ready to take action and build a stronger mindset, then keep listening. Mike, so nice to meet you, and thank you for making the time to come on the podcast.
My pleasure, Nick. Good to be here.
So I'm going to just jump in so our audience can learn a bit more about you. Can you give a quick background on yourself, the work you do, and also, how you came to be doing work in this area?
Okay, sure. Well, I was when I was growing up, I was interested a little bit in school, but in other things as well. But the one topic that I seemed to do well at was math. And so when I decided to go, eventually when I graduated from high school and decided to go to college, which was a long time ago, I decided to go to the University of California at Berkeley, which was across the country from where I lived. I didn't know anybody, but they had a good math department. So I stayed there for undergraduate, majored in math, just like the plan. And then I was going to go work for a computer company, but one of my professors in my senior year convinced me, it was in a probability course, convinced me that I should go to graduate school in their statistics department there. So I did. And so I had great professors and learned a lot and got my PhD in statistics with an emphasis on game theory. And from there, as most people do, get a PhD from University of California at Berkeley. I went into the academic world, one of the California state universities, and got involved in doing research in that area. But then as time passed, I got involved in consulting because there was a lot of activity in the gaming industry, not necessarily online at that time because there wasn't any online, but there was a lot of activity nonetheless, just in computer gaming. And then as the internet came into play and everyone started using it, and then smartphones, which of course now everyone has, gaming companies are the type of there are some gaming companies where you just play the game and it's a game of competition, but the developers like to want to offer wagering, and that's particularly true in sports betting because there's no particular game to play other than betting on the outcome. But you can't just do that in the United States. You have to satisfy various regulators, ranging from the bank, who's going to support you. You have to put the money somewhere, to state regulators, because different states in America have different rules on gambling. Sports betting has become the federal law on sports betting was relaxed a few years ago, so it's a lot easier now. And then there are local sort of technical regulators, like the people at the App Store, who are only going to let certain apps, or the Android store, be on their platform. And so it turned out that you need a statistician, someone like me, to write a report in many cases showing that the wagering game is a skill-based game rather than a game of chance. So the definitions are a bit weird because they're written by lawyers, but still they need someone like me to officially pronounce that the games are games of skill, which I couldn't do if it was the lottery or a craps game in a casino or roulette or something like that, because those games have no skill. So that's sort of how I got to where I am today. I'm still in the Berkeley, California area, San Francisco Bay Area. But I teach mainly online, teach basic statistics, and I've written a book called The Story of Chance, What's Luck Got to Do with It, that you can get on Amazon or the Barnes & Noble, any of the online booksellers, which sort of summarizes a lot of the work I've done in this area, particularly involving chance versus skill. So here we are.
You're looking to make a change, to lose weight, to get toned, to gain self-confidence, all in just 24 minutes a day, then go no further. You can check out the Move Your Mind community by going to nickbrax.start.page. Thank you for sharing, and I want to ask you about the book in more detail in a second. I'll go into that, and we'll direct our listeners as well where to go for that. I'm really interested in, and especially for our audience, like a lot of the people listening are, entrepreneurial, taking risks, wanting to do something different with their life. If I look at my own life, what's caused me a lot of anxiety is I've gone down a path where I've taken chances on myself. I've gone and started different businesses. I've followed a career in acting. I've had to continually fail, get rejected, come back and keep, against what feels like logic. So when you're doing something like that, what is there a way to work out, or what's your view on the area of luck versus chance versus how do you break that down?
Well, first of all, your story that you were just describing is pretty similar to most people's story, in the sense that there are lots of random things that are going to happen, no matter how good you are at what you're doing. And there are also going to be random things that happen that'll sort of have you follow a certain path as opposed to some other path. And you have to be prepared for that, in the sense that you have to not get totally freaked out when something happens that isn't quite the way you want it. Now, there are mathematical ways to talk about that. For example, a professor of mine once wrote a mathematical paper that's just very abstract math, but the title of the paper essentially was, I'm paraphrasing to make it sound not be too technical, but the title of the paper was, it's okay to make mistakes, just don't do something really stupid. And so the point of that paper was that it's okay. People learn by making mistakes. That's basically the main way to learn. And so you'll make mistakes along the way. Just don't do, the point of this paper was, just don't do something really crazy, or you might lose everything and not have a chance to regroup. But there are many different aspects of randomness that are just part of our daily lives. For example, I don't know if you ever studied chemistry, but the second law of thermodynamics basically says that randomness is increasing in the universe. Now, that's a paraphrase. It's much more technical than that, but namely, we're constantly encountering disorder of one kind or another. And one of the reasons for that, which I mentioned in my book, is that it's a lot easier to break something than it is to put it back together. So Humpty Dumpty, for example, the nursery rhyme character, fell off a wall, and that was easy. But all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. Well, that's a little lesson, because that's what life is like, and even on a very scientific way. And then there's also randomness in quantum mechanics, which just was discovered and learned about in the last 100 years or so, which may seem like a long time, but it's not when you look at at science going all the way back to Newton and Galileo and before, the Greeks. And so quantum mechanics showed something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is that it's impossible to measure both the velocity and the location of a subatomic particle. You have to use probability. There's randomness in there. And so what's the lesson of that? Well, the main lesson of that is you're going to have to deal with chance or randomness, no matter how good you are, no matter how focused you are. I'm not saying that that's something that's going to stop you from achieving what you want to achieve, but there are a lot of people who sort of get frustrated by all that and don't just keep going, because there are lots of randomness can provide lots of good things too. Now, so your question was about, sort of included things like you mentioned chance and skill. And so do you want me to just go over a couple of things, or you want to be more focused?
No, if you can, maybe if you can briefly go over a couple of things that would be interesting for context.
Okay, good. So let's start with a very simple game that's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, namely a lottery. In America, the two most popular multi-state lotteries are Powerball and Mega Millions. Now, of course, you're in Australia and in other countries around the world, just about every country, there are lottery type games that are played. Well, in America, the Mega Millions lottery is pure chance. All lotteries are pure chance. Numbers are, you're trying to guess in advance some numbers that are going to get drawn at random. So you're guessing random numbers. And there's no way that you can predict random numbers. That's part of the definition. But it's still fun to play. And people have their own prejudices and superstitions about it. But in the Mega Millions lottery in the US, the chance that you win, if you buy one ticket, is about 1 in 303 million. Well, that's a very low probability, and low probabilities are hard to put in context, even by mathematicians. So to give a couple analogies, if you buy 50 Mega Millions tickets a week, you'll win the jackpot on the average of once every 116,000 years. If you have to drive a mile every time you buy a ticket, go down to the local mini market, you'll have to drive an average of 633 round trips to the moon in mileage before you win the jackpot. If you know one person in Canada, just one person, put everyone in Canada's names on pieces of paper and put it in a giant box, close your eyes and draw one name out, you're 8 times more likely to get your friend than you are to win the jackpot if you buy a ticket to the Mega Millions lottery. So that's how unlikely it is. So why did I mention all these analogies? Because it seems like it's almost impossible to win. However, there are winners. Every couple of weeks, there's a winner. The winner always wins a couple $1 million or more, going all the way up to $1.6 billion for the highest jackpot. So the obvious question, you don't have to be a mathematician to ask this question. If the chances are so low, why are there winners? And the answer is not really mathematical, but it's very important. The answer is because so many tickets are sold. Now that sounds kind of duh. It's obvious, but it may be obvious, but it is a much more general phenomenon than lottery jackpot winners, because that's what happens in your daily life. There are many, and to put this in a more formalized way, you can say, given enough opportunity, any weird thing will happen just due to chance. So people don't realize that there are lots of things going on. You just don't know about them until you see the winner or the loser, because you don't want to know about all the people who lost the lottery. You only want to know when someone wins. Well, that sort of hides the fact that the world is teeming with various things happening that are related to unlikely events. And occasionally these unlikely events happen, but you only find out when somebody achieves that one way or the other. So that's a fact about chance. Now, there's another fact about skill. First of all, the casino games of craps and roulette, that is dice and the wheel that gets spun around, are games of pure chance. You can't win in the long run. There's a mathematical fact called the law of averages that says if you play a game like rolling dice over and over again, like craps over and over again, then in the long run, what will happen to you is what the probabilities are on just one single roll. In other words, you can predict in advance. I can't tell you whether I'm going to get a 7 when I roll the dice on any single roll. I don't know. The chance is 1 in 6. That's all I can tell you. But I can tell you that if I roll the dice over and over again, the fraction of time 7 comes up in a long period of rolls is 1/6 of the time. That's from the law of averages. So what does that mean? That means if you bet on 7, the casino has a payoff odds of 4-1, which means you win $4 for every dollar you bet every time 7 comes up. So I don't know, I'll be lucky if I win, I'll be unlucky if I lose. But if I play a lot and just make that bet over and over again, the law of averages says I'll win about 1/6 of the time and lose about 5/6 of the time and have a net loss of 17 cents per dollar bet. So there's no way to win if I play over and over again a game like craps. Now you can say, well, I was lucky. Well, maybe you were, but if you keep playing, you'll lose. So gamblers sort of go to different areas. In the game of blackjack, giving you a little tour of the casino here, the game of blackjack, sometimes called 21, is a card game that people thought that before 1950, people lumped in the same category as craps and roulette. But then in the late 1950s, some computer programmers at IBM who were working on computer simulations did some computer simulations with the game of blackjack and discovered that it's possible to have a winning strategy. So it was, in order to do this, though, you had to keep track of the cards as they were coming out of the deck. And that's not easy to do. It takes concentration, it doesn't take any math skills. So a guy who was a math professor named Ed Thorpe, who was a professor at UC Irvine at the time, wrote a book called Beat the Dealer. It came out in 1962. It's still in print today. It gave blackjack strategies and how to win at blackjack. Now, there was a movie about 15 years ago called 21. It was a very popular movie that talked about these teams of blackjack players. Some of them were MIT students that sort of, it was based on a true story about some people who did have teams of blackjack players. But the point is, blackjack has become a game where if it's played under good conditions for the player, then the player has an advantage over the casino, unlike craps, roulette, or lotteries. And so that brings up another question. If I have, let's say I have $10,000 and I'm playing, now, even if you're the world's greatest blackjack player, you'll win about 51% of the time and lose about 49% of the time, giving you a 2% edge over the casino. So let's say I have $10,000 and I'm going to play blackjack. And let's say I bet it all on the first hand. Now there's a 49% chance, almost a 50% chance that I'll lose and be broke. So there's an obvious lesson there. And if I keep doing it, I will eventually be broke. So there's an obvious lesson there, which is you have to manage your money. And so there are various ways to do that. Another mathematician named Claude Shannon and another mathematician named J.R. Kelly, both working at Bell Labs, back around the time Thorpe's book came out, wrote papers on how to manage your money. You have to bet only a fraction of your bankroll. Well, okay, that is certainly true for playing blackjack, but it's also true for anything where you're risking money. So if you're taking a risk, whether it's playing blackjack in a casino or going to or buying stocks or buying options in the options market or buying cryptocurrency, which is popular now because that's a form of risk taking, because crypto goes, as you know, goes up and down. You can't just do that without having a money management strategy. Otherwise, you will, even if you have a good game, which is sometimes called positive expected value or positive EV, which means EV stands for expected value, which means you can win in the long run. It's not going to happen unless you can manage your money. So anyway, I have a chapter in my book called The Crypto King Gets Conned. The Crypto King cons himself. You may have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried, otherwise known as SBF, who was a young guy who had a degree in math and physics from MIT and who started a crypto hedge fund and also a crypto investment website. And he was very smart, and he could tell when games like certain crypto bets had positive EV. But he didn't care about the money management side of it. And you can get technical about it, but it's intuitively pretty clear what's going to happen. He started betting more than he could afford to bet and started going broke or not being able to bet how much he wanted to bet. So he started borrowing from his investors without telling them. And so as a result of that, he was a billionaire at the age of 30. But as a result of betting more than he should, he wound up losing it all, and he's now in prison. He's in the same prison as Puff Daddy in New York. But that's an example, an extreme example of someone who likes to take risks and knows how to do it, knows how to identify good bets, but still doesn't know how to manage his money and therefore gets in trouble.
That's so interesting. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Are you interested in joining a community of like-minded people who are on the same journey as you are? Even though you're the one that needs to do the work, you don't have to go it alone. You can find all of the information at nickbrax.start.page. So I'm interested if we take it back then to, let's say that, I guess if I use myself, like, some of the things that I've
Let's see.
The acting world, I'm going into that career, and I know it's highly competitive. There's only, I know percentage-wise, there's only a certain amount of people that get chosen for roles. You're going for audition after audition after audition, getting rejected. How do you decide if you're going to use mathematics, whether it is a smart idea to keep going, or whether you should try and look at something else? Or is it the kind of thing, like you're saying, where you go down these pathways, but you have the open mind that, okay, it might not go how I want, but maybe it'll take me in a different direction, and I've got to be open to go in those directions?
Right. Well, that's very interesting because, first of all, the first thing you said was very clear and important, namely, the chance of getting a role, if you're just a starting out actor, is very low. Now, in math, you can say, well, the chance of me winning something may be very low, but if I keep playing, I'm eventually going to win. And so you have to, so that's true. And if you keep going, and if you have some skill or talent in acting, if you keep going to auditions, you'll eventually get a role. But you have to be able to sustain yourself until then. And so, and if in Hollywood, most people who are aspiring actors have a day job. Like they say that 90% of the waiters in Los Angeles are aspiring actors. And so you just have to plan. I never thought I would I didn't have any desire to be an actor, but I did want to be a math person. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but you just sort of have to, if you know that you have some skill in the area, you just have to keep going at it. And it becomes a game of skill, and just be able to sustain yourself during the difficult periods. Now, the other thing you mentioned that's very interesting is that sometimes you'll come to a fork in the road and go in the direction that might be a little different than what you were planning to do, and find out that that's a very successful fork in the road for you. There's a movie that's out right now called Woman of the Hour. It's by Anna Kendrick. I don't know if you've seen it. She was she's a young woman, a very successful actor. She's been in a number of shows and series on streaming series. And she decided to be a director and directed this movie that's based on the story about a serial killer back in the 1970s or so. But it's a hugely successful movie. But here's a person who, suddenly had the desire to be a director, and it turned out that she's really good at it. And so it's not really a mathematical thing, but, go back to what I said at the beginning, namely, it's all right to make mistakes, just don't do anything really stupid, which means you have to follow your dreams, but you have to be prepared for not getting to them tomorrow. And if you are able to sustain yourself, then just keep going. And it happens a lot, where you will go in some completely different direction. One of my best friends, his name is Ed, was he was a chess master, and he was really good in chess and math. Went to Stanford when he was 15, and he was a math major at Stanford, did really well. But he had also learned classical music when he was growing up. His parents made him take. He could play the violin, but just about any other instrument. So he knew how to do that. So he came to Berkeley for graduate school. That's where I met him. This was a long time ago. And this was in Berkeley in the late 1960s, and there were a lot of bands getting started back then. The Grateful Dead, Country Joe and the Fish, Creedence Clearwater Revival. You may have heard of some of these bands. They were big bands back then. The Beatles were just getting started in England. So my friend, who was a math major along with me in graduate school, had this knowledge about music, and there were a couple of Berkeley. There was a Berkeley music play studio and movie studio called Fantasy Records. They also produce a number of Oscar-winning movies, and they needed somebody because these bands, the musicians in the bands were just these young kids who had never learned how to write down the scores of the songs they were writing, write down the notes, so to speak, or do any production. So he just sort of fell into this job of writing the notes for these bands that were just getting started because nobody knew how to do it except him. And well, there were a few other people, but he was very good at it. So we started going off in that direction, and before you know it, he was had a very important role in the music business. And he, I don't know if you saw any of the Peanuts movies, the Charlie Brown specials, Garfield the Cat. He turned out he wrote the music for all those because it just that by accident, a random thing, he knew how to write the music down when none of these starting up bands back then knew how to do it. And so he just happened to what he considered to be just sort of almost like being a secretary or a typist or something, but in music. He never considered that he would have a career in music, and he became the most sought after music composer in the San Francisco area for advertising. So just tons of ads and stuff. So he had a very successful career at that, but it all started out with a random thing, this sort of accidental, even though he knew music, he was never planning to do it for a living. But that's sort of what you were talking about. But in order to find that initial job of writing down the music for the Country Joe and the Fish songs, he had to be out there. He had to make himself known, and so that's the sort of the secret: is you have to sort of get involved in whatever areas you're interested in, and just don't take no for an answer, or don't take rejections for an answer. If that's what you want to do, then if you have some skill at it, and keep trying, it's amazing what will happen. You'll succeed.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think what you're saying there is so important for people in this day and age to hear, because a lot of the time, now everyone wants a quick fix. Everyone wants,
right.
How do I get success overnight? It's not working. I'm going to change and do something different. But if you keep changing your mind all the time and you can't go, you can't stick things out, you're not going to, like if he, he wouldn't have found that opportunity if he changed his mind and went a different direction and that, and you give up before you give something enough time. So I see that as being, a big problem, because now people can't focus, they're looking for quick fixes.
That's exactly right. And it's very important to, even if you're looking for a quick fix, to give yourself the time to make the connections and to be successful. For a friend of mine who was in the sports betting business in Las Vegas, and ran a number of sports betting establishments, and he introduced online betting, sports betting. He had this saying, it was up on the wall of his office, it said, "Don't be afraid to win." And so the meaning of that is that if you have some failures along the way, just don't be afraid to keep going and to win. My friend Ed, to go back to what you were saying a minute ago, it took years before he actually went from just writing down the notes for these bands to where he was producing music and writing movie scores and things like that. It didn't just happen overnight. And he was broke for a good number of years because, how much are you going to pay someone to, think, I have this great song, I just want you to write down the notes so we can get a copyright on it. So, you don't make any money at that. But so he just hung around the studios, Fantasy Records, which was the home of Creedence Clearwater Revival and a number of other jazz bands and well-known musicians. He just sort of hung out there for a long time and then finally started getting the breaks.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I love all the things you're talking about are super interesting here. Where can our listeners go to purchase your book, learn more about you? Where can we send them?
Okay, so my book, The Story of Chance, What's Luck Got to Do with It, which is focused on skill and luck, is available at Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble, the online bookseller, the main online booksellers. As for me, I have a presence on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a lot of excerpts from the book, and I wrote recently another book, which is more of a textbook, called Probability and Statistics Made Interesting. But the one that is for a general audience is The Story of Chance. And then if you just Google me, you'll find a few things. But LinkedIn is my official place where I put up stuff these days.
Fantastic. For everyone listening, we'll have all of those links in the show notes. So make sure to go and check it out. Go and have a look at Mike's work and buy his book. It sounds interesting. I'm going to be buying it and having a read myself. So everyone listening, buy the book, have a listen. I finish every episode with 5 closing questions. So these can be sort of quick answers, whatever comes to mind for you. But one final thing before I go into that just came to mind. In terms of chance with mathematics, how do you explain, we all have these experiences where you might be talking to a friend or thinking of someone that you haven't seen in 20 years. You fly to the other side of the world and you walk down the street and you bump into them. When you have these like coincidental things, these events happen, things where you think about it, you're like, what the fuck? Like, this would be mathematically almost impossible. How the hell did this happen? How do we explain that sort of stuff?
Well, one way to explain it is what I call the lottery principle, namely the idea that given enough opportunity, weird things like what you just mentioned happen just due to chance. So, for example, you go fly from New York to Australia, and you're walking down the street and you see someone you saw in New York, and how did that happen? Well, there are lots of other people who are going around the world. There are lots of other people who walk down the street, and a few of them will have a random encounter with somebody, and it's just due to chance. Now, there are other things too. The famous psychiatrist Carl Jung, who was very well known back in the mid 1900s, 1950s, 1960s. He wrote a book on something. He wrote a number of books, but he wrote a book. He wrote a lot about the unconscious and what he called the collective unconscious. And he wrote a book about something called synchronicity. And to him, his definition of synchronicity was a weird encounter or coincidence type thing that can't be explained by chance, but that isn't part of physics, isn't like a cause and effect thing. So something in between chance and physics. Well, most of the time when people have looked at his examples as a psychiatrist, a lot of them having to do with his patients, they could be explained by chance. So as a statistician, I can say, well, amazing things do happen just by chance. So, and one of the reasons they happen just by chance is because there's so much opportunity. There's so many, in your case, and for your example, there's so many people walking around and flying around from place to place. That just by chance, some are going to meet people that they think, hey, that's impossible. What are the odds, they'll say, of meeting, my long-lost cousin who I saw in New York 2 months ago walking down the streets of Melbourne. And so that can be explained by chance because of the fact that there's so much opportunity. There's so many So you don't hear about the people who walk down the street and they didn't meet their cousin.
Yeah.
So there are there's a lot of background noise that you're just not aware of. Of the background noise, what I mean by that is the many times that these weird kind of things are possible but don't happen. And the same is true, of course, on the negative side. The same is true for having accidents. People study that a lot. What does it mean to be accident prone? What does it mean to have an accident? Well, it's possible just by randomness to have an accident, but sometimes people say, how could that have happened to me? And again, that's one of these things that can be explained in various ways. But one of the explanations that people sort of overlook, or at least don't give enough importance to, is just randomness, that these things happen. And the reason for that is because we just don't notice what's going on in the background of the opportunity of such things happening.
That makes sense.
Yeah. A funny little example. This is not exactly what I was talking about, but there's a guy on TV who is very well known. He's a stock market. He has a stock market show, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he became famous by predicting every stock market crash since, I think, 1995, going back a long time. Going back 25, 30 years, something like that. He predicted every single crash. Now, so people say, how could that possibly happen? He must be really skilled. Well, the secret is every week he predicts a stock market crash. So he's predicted a stock market crash every single week since 1995. And most of the time, there is no stock market crash, but nobody notices. Because how am I going to say, hey, this is the guy who didn't predict a crash last Wednesday? So nobody notices that. They only notice the times when there really was a crash and he predicted it.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram at NickBrax. I really appreciate your ongoing support. Interesting. That's actually fascinating. That really does make a lot of sense. I like that example. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing all of this. We'll wrap it up, but like I said, these can be super quick answers. The closing questions. The first one is, what's your best childhood memory that comes to mind for you? A random one here for you.
That's a really good one. Well, what do you mean by childhood? Okay, like before I went to college, you mean that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, when I was about 15, I won a judo tournament. That was the big sport I was interested in then. And I never thought I'd be any good at it. And then suddenly I was good at it. It was sort of like what we've been talking about. You just keep going at it and going at it. But I actually won this tournament at a young age.
Oh, I love that. That's great. What do you think's the biggest burden on mental health currently in society?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think you mentioned it, and namely the fact that this is a society that young people, and not just young people, everybody these days has trouble paying attention, and some of it has to do with technology. And I'm a big technology person. I'm not opposed to technology, but there has to be some guardrails to keep people from, always looking at their smartphone, only being able to pay attention for 5 minutes. So that leads to mental health problems.
Totally.
And I think that's one of the big problems with today's society.
I agree. What's your personal definition of happiness?
These are great questions. I don't know if I'm giving good answers to them, though. My personal definition of happiness is if I like what I'm doing and I can just keep doing it without feeling, everybody gets frustrated and you have to take breaks and stuff, but to sort of enjoy what I'm being paid to do.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty good. If you could give one piece of advice to your 18-year-old self, what would that be?
Oh, okay. One bit of advice to my 18-year-old self would be, don't hang out with the wrong crowd.
That's a good one as well.
And have confidence in yourself.
Yep, I like that. I like it. That's good advice. Well, final one. What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? Well, there's not one single event, but what I'm most proud of right now is that how, after messing around for a long time in university administration, having administrative roles, which they were good in ways, but now I'm back doing research and writing and stuff like that. And so I'm most proud of the fact that I was able to get back on the track that I had originally started out on.
I love that. And, that's a great example because, life is not, it doesn't go in a straight line.
No.
And like you're saying there, we got to be open to, it's going to go up and down. We're going to have different phases, but you've stayed on that path. And when you look back, you can see this body of work you've created. And
Yeah.
I think it's a really great, I really appreciate you making the time to, share all of this with our audience. I know they will take a lot out of it. Love the work you're doing. And again,
thank you.
I look forward to reading your book.
Well, thank you so much. And my pleasure. I'm very happy to be on your show. Good show.
I appreciate it, mate. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care. Have a good one.
Thank you, Dr. Mike Orkin, for joining me today and offering your insights. And thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and any suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about. Feel free to just leave a comment or send a DM. Your feedback's always appreciated. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.